Sadly, I think we're stuck with this light being on. Someone broke the cord. Wasn't us, of course. Someone else. Don't know who. All right. I think we should be good to go. And Right, so we'll get started. Obviously, this is just our final session in terms of the lecture slot. So you'll gain an extra hour's sleep, I hope, in the coming weeks, which is always good. Doing carrying a chair around. That belongs here. So lovely to see you all again. It's been a few weeks, well, a couple of weeks at best, and it's good to see you all in the same room. Some rebels in the group, I see. Regardless, though, lovely to see you all. So obviously this is our wrap-up lecture, more than anything just to kind of close off the lecture series and wave it goodbye, and of course as we transition to focus on the final third of the semester, which is of course probably the hardest part, which is getting the projects done and dusted, and then of course submitted on time for the week 15 submission, which of course was some savvy-eyed person managed to point out I had set for a year ago rather than this year. Thank you for pointing that out. Who was that? Excellent, thank you. That happened last year as well. It always takes a student to point it out to me before I realise. In any case, though, your submissions were not due for last May. They're due for this May. And of course that is Tuesday the 23rd of May or 24th of May, one of the two. But it's Tuesday of week 15 by midnight. And of course for anybody that takes the 48-hour extension, that'll probably be the Thursday. And anybody that takes if you've got a 5-day extension, I think you've got one that you're allowed to use. I don't know how it works anymore. Depending on the situation you're in, you can use that. And of course, for anybody with mitigating circumstances who can apply for the 10-day extension based on external factors that are obviously not your fault, of course, that happens all through SES. So I know now and again students will email me asking me for an extension. I actually have zero power over extensions, sadly. That's all handled externally by the student inquiry zone or student services, depending which way you look at it. So if you're someone who's got themselves in a bit of a pickle due to technical issues or bereavement, or there are personal issues that have stopped you from studying to the best of your abilities, and you can evidence those, you can apply, of course, for the 10-day extension, which is a relief, of course, to some people. And in the most extreme conditions, if you find yourself in an impassable circumstance, of course, there are things like deferrals as well, where you can defer the submission to another date and time, depending on your situation. And those, of course, are there for a reason. I know some people can talk themselves into a corner on this one, but it's they're there to be used. I wouldn't have got through university if it wasn't for systems like that, because I'm one of these people who finds myself in awfully dramatic scenarios one way or another. But in any case, though, they are there to be used. If you need them, of course, make your applications forthwith through SES and inquiry zones based on that. I think the only thing they don't cover is things like hardware failure. So if you go, hey, my hard drive died, I need an extension, their answer will be no, sadly. So at this point, it's probably a good time to remind people to back up everything that you do regularly, and to have some sort of online system as well. So a local system and an online solution or a cloud-based solution is always a good idea, especially when it comes to salient or important work like coursework and other things that you may have. Luckily, lots of those things are, you can get a lot of that for free these days. Always wonder, do they really mean free? What part are we selling, and are the AI overlords taking over? So that's an interesting discussion on the horizon. We'll do that in a different module at a different time. But I've done some deep dives on AI lately, and I walked to work a little quicker than usual this morning, I noticed, though it was almost late. I was busy working on some third-year stuff. I have a lecture with them at 11 o'clock, and there was something we needed to cover, and I looked at the clock and I went, oh, it's 20 to 10. I'm supposed to be somewhere. Yes, the building. So it was a very hasted walk to work this morning. Anyone watch any interesting films over the 2-week break? What'd you watch?
I watched the Elvis movie.
Was it any good?
It's phenomenal.
It's a Baz Luhrmann film, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, amazing. I really like Baz Luhrmann films. All that pizzazz and glitter.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, please. Um, I watched. I'm one of the. Something happens when you get to your 30s. All you do is rewatch everything you've seen before, and you stop watching new stuff because everything's crap after that. And that's every generation says that. So I tried catching up on some Marvel films, and they've just turned into dog trash. I don't know what's happened there. That's my opinion. In case anyone's listening from Disney, you know what they're like. I come across as paranoid this morning, but one film did surprise me. And I thought it was quite a treat. I say the new Scream film. It's the one from last year. Did everyone seen the new Scream film at all? Just me then. And I guess it's a film very much aimed at people who grew up with those films. You know, kind of standard teenager slasher horror film. Teenagers running around screaming, person in a mask stabbing everybody. It's horrible. But when we were growing up, that was the scary film of the du jour of the day. And of course, they tried to relaunch it in 2011 to not much success, and then they relaunched it last year, and it did seem to do quite well because it had enough content, enough time had got past where everybody who grew up with that film is now 30 and looking for films that are like the ones they grew up with. So it was very meta level, but it's I'd say the smartest form of meta awareness in film I've ever seen. And it's clever that way, and it compares and contrasts with the new Matrix film quite well. Has anyone had the unfortunate circumstances of seeing the new Matrix film? Have you seen it? It's the first time I think in my life where my urge to leave the cinema was overwhelming.
You went to the cinema to see it?
Yeah.
That was a waste of money.
And time and energy and life. I was so gutted. And I love that series and what it represents and all the various little subtopics. Its little octopus plot can kind of have its tentacles in the pie, and it's wonderful. And then this film goes and ruins it all just by being plain awful. It's like one long advert for how films shouldn't be, and in that way, maybe that's its service to the world. But anyway, if you ever want a cheap laugh and a good night in, don't take it too seriously. Watch The Matrix 4 and take notes. It's just how not to make a film. In any case, though, I thought Scream did that much better, and I was like, because it's a new kind of writing, these films that are super aware of their prequels. Essentially, they even talk openly, breaking the fourth wall, about the older film and the older franchise, and it's all a bit corny, but it didn't work in The Matrix. It does work in the Scream film. So I recommend, if you're into horror slasher films, it's worth a watch. A little bit brutal in places, more so than I was expecting. And so again, one of those things I've noticed, one of those people who grew up loving brutality in films, and now that I'm in my sort of heading towards 40, it's like, oh no, that looks really sore. No thanks. So that was bits in it I find quite shocking. So you don't handle gore and horror and violence well, don't watch it at all. But in any case, though, that's my film recommendation of the Easter break in this case was indeed Scream. I think it's just called Scream. And they've now released a trailer for the one that's coming next year, and it looks like they're about to undo all the hard work they've done last year, as is typical of the corporate machine that is Hollywood. But you can't blame them. You got to try. Something has to happen. If something succeeds, throw another film out. So what if it doesn't do so well? At least you tried, right? Moving on. Put on my slideshow. Series wrap up, and hopefully some form of critical discussion based around any of the topics that we've raised so far in the lecture series. Originally, this was supposed to be a 5-part lecture series. It's kind of grown arms and legs since then because I like the time slot more than anything. It's a chance to talk to people about important things around the module. That includes things like a welcome lecture and an exit lecture. So there's kind of no real kind of hard academic content, but more of a discussion about where we've come from and where we're going moving forward into the final stages of your projects, of course. And usually around this time of year, I would normally ask a really horrible question like, how are you feeling about your projects? And it never goes down well, so I've stopped asking, so don't try to answer. Ultimately, though, I think the next few weeks are really where things start to come together. And I know some people will feel very behind, some people will have raced ahead and are doing okay. And then somewhere in the middle is where most people are, which is kind of bringing things together. You're making stuff, not all of it looks or makes total sense just now, but over the next few weeks you will start to bring that together and it will make sense eventually. The proof is in the pudding every year. Every single cohort that comes through these doors feels the same about their projects, and then by week 15, by magic and a lot of effort, some screaming, and hopefully not much hair tearing, you will have produced something that looks and feels quite wonderful and is a good representation of what you're capable of. And ultimately, this is, as I described in week 1, it's like being pushed into the deep end of a pool sort of module. Ultimately, where we want you to be is just to know and feel a little bit more comfortable around 3D software by the time this module is over, so that when it comes to second year, the hard production module isn't so alien to you. What makes this module particularly difficult to teach is that everybody does come from different backgrounds. Your experience with 3D software is varied, and I think probably, and this isn't a criticism by the way, so don't riot when I say it, but most of people in this class actually had no experience in 3D at all, which is fine, but it's just, you see that changed based on cohorts in different years, but also I think the impact of COVID and what it's done to your particular year group is becoming more evident in terms of, I think, personal confidence in speaking. Your creative confidence is fine. Everything's intact there. And you're all normal, healthy artists that way. And by what I mean normal, healthy artists, you all have that lingering self-doubt that affects us every day. And we walk around swanning about going, oh, what am I doing? But that's normal, never goes away. That's part of being an artist and a creative, by the way. And you get used to it. And actually, you end up leaning on it more than anything. But I think in terms of your ability to convey what you're thinking and say out loud what your project is, I know I mentioned it, it sounded probably a little bit snarkier than I intended it, that during the pitch presentations, a lot of you self-selected just to kind of just show me slides rather than narrate it. That does come across as a confidence issue, but not something that's unsolvable. And I think by the time hopefully second year and third year comes along, there'll be more opportunities for that voice to come forward. And that's why I insist that things like presented stuff isn't marked, not at least until maybe fourth year at the absolute most, when you do have a collection of work and experience behind you. But I'm not sure if other people do graded presentations, but it's not my style. So never worry about that. If you've gone a bit quiet or you're not feeling too confident about speaking out loud in a presentation or a pitch situation, won't affect grades. That shouldn't affect grades, not until you've built up, I think, that sort of personal sense of direction. In any case, though, where am I going with this one? So I think we'll just start with a bunch of reminders, just because there are a bunch of resources that are kind of, they're a little bit underutilized, just looking at the statistics on MLS, so it's worth pointing them out. They are there to help, and it's worth referring to. And I guess you never really need these things until you need them. So I guess in the next few weeks, as the module begins to come to a close, then they might get access just that little bit more, which is perfectly fine. So remember that the tutorial PDFs are all there, and some of the video content, well, all the video content's on MLS, including stuff from classes that you may or may not have missed, or you want to see how to do something again. It's worth retreading that stuff, of course. There's links to external resources, examples of all sort of a good selection of previous courseworks available in the gallery. I think it was last year's module review, one of the common criticisms was that there wasn't enough student samples, but the student samples had been available all semester. 3 people had accessed it, so I was like, please look. That is there, and of course I do tend to put up pretty good examples. I don't think there's any point in putting bad examples up. I think, aspiration is important in the creative arts, and having done this for several years, when I put bad examples up, all it does is kind of set a low bar for people to aim for, and actually I'd rather you aimed high, and if you get below it, so what? It's the attempt, it's the trying that matters more than anything. And again, this module, by the way, I'm a bit of a light touch on the marking. Now, don't take that verbatim. It doesn't mean that you hand in nonsense and it gets an A, not like that at all. But it is a very forgiving module in that this is a bunch of new skills, new processes, and new things that you're doing and trying. I want to see how you bring all that together more than anything. Of course, weekly task feedback videos. I have missed the beat on that one. I'll be quite open about it. I have not found the time at all, especially in the early half of the semester. My timetable was beyond what I could handle. You may have noticed that my face was probably quite red for a lot of that. Hopefully it's not too red now, but my blood pressure levels were reaching new heights of impossible there. There was a bunch of projects that landed on my plate. Typically, I have the room to feed back in these sort of things and provide that extra sense of, quality. to the module. I could not find the space this semester. It just wasn't able to happen. So I do feel a bit guilty about that, but more than anything, I'm still happy to see that plenty of students did try their hand at those weekly tasks, and it was good to see that. A bunch of you, as of this morning, may have noticed that if you'd completed, I think it was 5 weeks worth of those tutorials, or 5 weeks of those tasks, that you'll have got a certificate when you log into MLS. So well done to those. I think there's about 12 people in the class. Got a lovely weekly task maestro certificate. Well done. You can print that off and hang it on your wall and be proud of it, I think. And of course, there's other things like project guidance, of course, you can find on MLS as well, which is worth looking. And of course, we've addressed this particular slide a few times in the past. I like to do it usually every 2 weeks. I'd like to look at it just to get an update on where we're at. And I know even at this time of year, it can kind of feel that we're round about here, but we're safely here at number 10, which is, of course, that final third of the module, which is still essentially mid-production, which is building your assets, materials, your lighting, and of course starting to arrange how you might animate and move things about, and thinking about your cameras and how you might capture some of the stuff that you're animating and moving around anyway. And of course, moving past that, the next couple of weeks, 11 and 12, you want to be exiting production eventually towards things like exporting those scenes into something like Premiere. Good news is, being a reasonably small project, the editing for this is it's actually quite easy. It's reasonably small stuff. It takes a couple of days at the absolute most. And then you just want to package that up and submit it. So that'll be the module done and dusted for you. And then, of course, you can all look forward to a few months off doing what you do, whatever that might be, part-time work, holidays in the sun, or hanging about and chilling, whatever it is, playing some good computer games. I don't even know what a computer game is anymore. What are computer games? It's the thing that you watch on Twitch, isn't it? I always worry about that. I've been bitten twice when I purchased the computer game. I'm like, yay. And then it ends up being free on some platform 2 weeks later. So why am I paying for anything anymore? In any case, though, let's hope the economy doesn't collapse too quickly. It was actually really good news. I was doing some research. I was saying there'd be it's a finding work series of lectures that I do for my third years. And some of that can be a little bit of a reality check, which can be a little bit grim. But that's like 3 years in a row that despite the pandemic and other pressures on a global level, the creative sector's doing really well. That's good news for us, by the way. Yay. Particularly managed to avoid, like, there's some aspects that are affecting other industries and others, like the gig economy. There's portion of the creative economy still deeply affected by that 0 hours contracts and small menial work for contract hire. But in terms of employment and money, there's actually really good news there. So that cheered me up this morning doing some research there. I like to look into the statistics and figures on a sort of Scottish and UK-wide level. Things are looking good. And of course, even on a European level, which is kind of like where most people tend to want to move, is usually, let's start again there. Most people tend to want to return to where they're from or stay where they're from. So if you're from Scotland, most people kind of want to stay in Scotland and work there if they can, but tend to be willing to move to like local regions like maybe the north of England, and sometimes further south like London. And then a smaller portion of people are willing to do things more sort of European level, so willing to move to Germany, France, Switzerland, wherever it might be. And very, very few people are willing to do big international leaps like America, Canada, etc., etc. So the good news is that locally and nationally, things are quite healthy, and the economy there in terms of the creative sector is very, very good. But that was before the rise of AI, and the impact of what that's about to do to the creative sector is yet to be assessed. But good news, I don't think it's as bad as we thought it is. I think it looks worse on the surface in terms of like, oh, it's coming to steal our jobs. Not really. It's actually really hard to replace a creative. AI might make pictures, but it doesn't replace the skill, expertise, and implementation of the person that makes those pictures and where they fit in that pipeline. There's going to be a lot of sort of weird, sort of nasty tech heads out there that are just going to try and replace people. That's what they do. They want to reduce costs and see where this goes. But it won't end well. And so good news for us again, I think. And ultimately, the hard part for this, and I think philosophically, is how we make peace with AI in the future, because it's here to stay, and I hate it. But I there's a acute awareness. Things like this have happened before, by the way. Whether it's a new piece of software, there's, for instance, when I was in university, we spent 10 years learning how to do something that 2 buttons do now. Like, what? But still got plenty of work afterwards, because again, it doesn't replace the worker. So when it comes to AI, there's a lot of scare and fear out there, but the actual, when you kind of look at the conversations and the discussions happening at an employment level, things are nowhere near as bad as they might seem. But it's internet, so it's all high drama, of course, and hot takes and clickbaity articles with people's faces doing that, which I might start one day and see how it does. Quite fancied it. In any case, though, who's feeling okay about their projects? Hands up. There's a few. Don't laugh. That's not fair.
Sorry.
I was trying not to. You give it away. That's actually all right. Who's feeling like, ah? Oh, we're about half and half. That's better than last year. I'll put it that way. So I have a plan, I think, which I think might help a bit better, which is the teaching for weeks 11 and 12 in particular. I might just release that, just let it go and say, look, that's there, and you should go watch it and look at it. But what if class time was actually not about me sitting at the front of a room going, and now you press this button, and then that one, thanks, and just kind of helping people more directly with their projects. My only risk factor here, and you've witnessed it before, that class is big, and there's one of me, and there's only 2 hours. So helping people directly, say somebody takes 10 minutes, somebody takes 15, that can be really cruel to anybody that I don't get round to seeing, and it creates some sort of anger and animosity sometimes. But I'm trying to do the right thing, but there isn't 2 of me, sadly. So I need to figure that out correctly, and a way of prioritizing the difficulty of the tasks or the technical conundrums that people are running into. And of course, we will have the Tuesday drop-ins as well. They haven't been that popular. I thought they'd be busier, given that some people, given the level, there was a lot of people put their hands up there about projects, and I'm like, where have you been? We've had this online drop-in, and it's really useful. Unfortunately, we only have like a few of those left, but I will try and find more time, because I think some people find it easier to come to that online session. So I will try and find more time to kind of do some online stuff, if that helps. But again, it's fighting with my own schedule on that front, so we'll see where that leads to. But ultimately, I think at this point, my job should be to help you with your projects, rather than go, this is how you use Premiere Pro. I can make a video about that and just put it up instead and go, watch that, that'll tell you how to use Premiere Pro. And also, YouTube has 100 videos that probably do it better than me. That's the world I live in now. You're worried about AI, I'm worried about YouTube. It's been here for a decade and a half. In any case, though, I bloody love YouTube, by the way. I think it's the greatest invention since, I was going to say Wikipedia, but I'll go as far as sliced bread. And I love that phrase. Anyway, so, of course, the production stage is laid as well as there, so guidelines to finishing your projects and where you should be, and the order at which you should probably do things. Again, those are guidelines, not must-dos, but they do help. If you manage to follow these patterns, those are the sort of things that get you where you need to go. And also the assessment rubric, the thing that I will use to grade you, is available online as well. Now, this is something that I insist students use as at least as a rough way, because we don't do preliminary grading here in terms of, there's no, predicted grading. We don't do that in ART. So if you email me and go, can I have a predicted grade? The answer is no, simply because it's just not part of our process. What we do instead is I do at least, is the assessment rubric is there. Take a look at it, and are you fitting into those categories when you self-assess? It's just a rough guideline, but it really can help you at least check where you're feeling that you're at before you kind of make your submission. And I will, of course, provide additional checklists as well, just so you can tick things off and feel, I think lists are really useful that way. Just when you tick something off, you get that tiny little dopamine hit. You're like, oh, well, that felt good, didn't it? So again, I think things like that are important, help us feel productive, because again, when it comes to creativity, sometimes the task feels bigger than it is, and therefore when you start taking little slices off of it, things feel great. And of course, it's killing the project by 1,000 cuts, as I call it, which is great. And I don't mean financially, productively. So the assessment rubric, of course, covers the 3D visualization video itself. So looking at it from the creative achievement level, which is how you prepare, present that polished portfolio piece. And of course from a technical achievement, which is of course how it's come together in terms of modeling, its animation elements, the sort of technical stuff that's the 3D side of things. And the creative one is of course how you compare the elements of narrative and storytelling. So that sort of less physical sort of thing. And of course, the assessment covers as well is the production ebook, which is how you brought that together. So it covers things like the visual development, so your ability to source and interrogate a range of visual materials, evaluate their application to the development of your project. So, A for excellent things like, your project development book, you've demonstrated an excellent capacity to source and interrogate visual materials as you develop novel ideas in response to the project brief. Only minor improvements are possible there. So. And of course, project development is looking also as well is your concept development, how the idea has moved itself forward, how you've moved that idea forward. And then there are two little addendums at the end, which is of course presentation standards for both the 3D video and the production book. And these come across in 3 flavors only, which is strong, needs improved, or it's weak. And of course, last year, by the way, excellent cohort. They were some of the strongest ART104 cohorts I'd seen in a while. But one area where they really sucked was their presentation standards. Everything else was fine. So in many ways, I'll take that, But for us, I think in first year, that sort of stuff is a little bit more forgivable. But towards third and fourth year, we tend to crack down on that a bit more, because how you present yourselves, especially outwards towards creative jobs and creative sector, is far too important. And we're judged as artists visually in everything that we do, so we kind of need to get some things right. Not everything. There's parts like, a sketchbook doesn't need to be neat, but how you present it to other people does. So that's the way things work for us. So presentation standards are essentially, so strong one is like presentation of your work is being well considered. And so things like when it comes to the video, does it have a nice title, and are the credits, do they make sense? Perfect. If something can be improved, that usually means something's missing that's quite obvious, but everything else was fine. And weak is usually where it's like, well, you've just rushed this, and there was no need to. And of course, we think of the production book as well, as everything's there. And of course, you end up with a grade of some kind, of course, somewhere between A+ and F. Fs are extremely rare, by the way. MFs tend to be a bit more common and usually are reminiscent of people that have missed a few things and don't really know what's going on and have accidentally got themselves into a bit of a kerfuffle. And again, it's not a judgment, it's just the nature of the work. What it was marginally failed, which means what's there could have passed, had just a bit more work being done. And A+ is obviously at the other end of the scale, obviously for outstanding work where everything I'm looking for has been done to a high quality, and it's a big round of applause. And of course, traditionally in this module, I think cohorts tend to float in terms of average grading between B+ and C, which is good news. There was one year where it dipped to a C and a D+. I don't know what happened there, but then I realized it was the first year of the pandemic, and so that was a bit cruel. In any case, though, the 2 flavors, of course, of this module have always come down to the creative and the technical. Those 2 things, it's a double-edged sword that you've been wielding all semester. Creative side of it is, of course, your ideas and how you're making those come to life through your storytelling and plot, how you're going to animate and move those, the framing and composition of your scenes, the tone and the atmosphere that you achieve in your videos, any audio and sound effects that you might add. Remember that while those may not be essential, at least have some sort of audio in your show, in your piece. It will do work. Don't have to get into the nitty-gritty of sound effects. I know some people want to put those in anyway, go for it, but I'm not going to be too fussy about things like that. But I definitely think you should have some sort of audio that you've fished from somewhere that makes sense in the piece of work that you've done. Where it makes sense. Of course, audio isn't, there's some things like horror where you don't need it in certain scenes. Be careful with that, of course, as well. But even background noise can do so much for setting the tone and atmosphere in something that we're doing, even if it's just air. If you listen right now, nothing's ever quiet. There's 2 sound sources, there's 3 sound sources, 4 maybe. The atmosphere of your breathing and the shuffling that the audience do, that's yourselves, me mouthing off at the front, kind of that weird air sound that we get outside, it's just that, it's always there, and of course that that fan in particular seems quite loud. So even though we're in a reasonably quiet situation, there's always noise. And then outside, there's a lot of classrooms missing right now, but normally would have like some sort of kerfuffle over there, that general noise of people moving about. So adding that can do so much to grounding your scene in the reality that you're setting it. And of course, your problem solving abilities as well. On the technical side, which is how you have learned and deployed your 3D skills to make all of this come to life. So of course that comes down to your polygon modeling, lighting, materials, and how you've rendered this. Again, pushing my Arnold, if you're really ahead of the timeline and you're feeling confident about things, Arnold if you like, but you don't need it. Ultimately, hardware 2.0 or viewport 2.0 will do most of the work that we need to do for this module, all of the work that we need to do for this module. So there's no need to get caught up in Arnold rendering. I say it every year, but people just want to use it, so I'm not going to stop you. It does look great, we can't lie, you know. 3D animation and cameras, 2D assets, and the import and export of anything that you need inside of Maya. And of course the video sequencing and editing, that bit's usually that's the last step on this train anyway. And of course, remind that the original work guidelines are out there. I've had a few emails I think over the last couple of weeks I've yet to get round to. I did clear my inbox reasonably well last night. I think there's 2 or 3 still to go through. Ultimately, most of the work that we do should be our own, but you can, of course, source other things such as a character rig. I think at least one says there's up to 2 3D party animation rigs if you want to take them from. Have you ever been to 11secondclub.com? Fantastic website, but they've got a big list of usable rigs. Though some people wanted to rig their own. Cool. Good luck. Rigging's not a fun process. Unless you're technically minded. Some people love that stuff. It makes me violently not sleep, whatever that means. And of course, things like materials and textures, that can be a blend of like sort of photographs and texture sources from online, blend it with your own. So you're building your own materials. You can use external sources to build those materials, like a brick texture. That's fine. Sound effects, music, and particle rigs. Of course, that can be a mixture of sound effects and music can be, come from any third-party source as long as it's licensable. Just remember that if you're using copyrighted music, while I can mark that and assess it on MLS, because you're inside a safety net there really. When you put your work on YouTube, someone might copyright strike you, so be careful with that stuff. Now, some copyright strikes are like, yep, cool, that's our work, so we're going to monetize your video, and you're like, well, okay. Otherwise not. Crediting sources. Final piece of work should, of course, credit all reference sources, of course, so make sure that that is done in your ebook. So if it's like a general website like ArtStation, you just go like, this artist on ArtStation, here's a link. So don't have to like credit every single image. That can go a bit crazy sometimes. And of course, there's lots of copyright and fair use stuff out there, so anything that's CCO, which is, there's different flavors of fair use stuff. I use a lot of it myself in various projects. Some of it requires no attribution, and some of it does require specific attribution. Just make sure that if you're using work, check the license on it. Luckily, you're not monetizing work, and students are protected a lot more than the general population are because of education reasons. You're allowed to do things.
If you put it on YouTube and you use like copyrighted music, will it still get a strike if it's like unlisted and not monetized?
Yes. Well, you won't be allowed to monetize it if it's someone else's content anyway, but unlisted still counts as on YouTube, so they don't really, they don't differentiate there, sadly. I get because a lot of my modules, because everything we do is very entertainment focused, games and film. There's a lot of games and film clips in my stuff, so I get copyright strikes all the time. So I'm used to it, but it's really annoying. And sometimes you get copyright strike and they're like, yeah, well. And I'm like, well, do what you want with it. As long as my video's there, I don't care. But that's if you put it on YouTube. You don't have to. Sometimes you just submit. If you want to just put your video in the submission, that's fine. So you don't have to put it on YouTube. It's not a requirement. Some people will because they want to show people this thing that they've done, and that's fine. And that's fun to do as well. If you're proud of your work, you should share it and get that little buzz, because we don't get enough of that as artists. So always chase the dopamine hits, as they say. There's not enough of them in the world. So I'll have unlocked the rest of the videos, of course, as well. So how to do certain things inside of Maya. There's a bunch of like sort of little small animations or small videos, tutorials, roughly 10 to 15 minutes each of just how to do a specific thing. There was just a few more unavailable that I'll make available today, just as a little extra there, especially when it comes to those final few weeks and trimming what you're trying to do. Really, really important stuff. And of course, the video requests form is still there as well. So if there's something specific that I haven't covered that you would like to know, and if I find the time, then absolutely I will make a very quick video about that, so that, well, basically you get the answer and the class gets the benefit of that answer too. I don't like doing things in private. One, because I'm not a private tutor. Two, because it's a class needs to benefit from that answer as well. So that's why I like this. It's worked before. I checked just last night. Again, there's been no real requests made this so far. So if you check the announcements channel, there is a link there. It's pretty much open, and I'll close it basically, I think maybe in 2 weeks from now, because then it's just too late. And so if there's anything specific and I'm able to help, I will answer with a video that shows you how to do that. And of course, the stuff that we have... Who was I speaking to recently who wanted to do an underwater effect? I've cracked it.
Have you?
Yeah. I've done something I didn't think was possible in Maya. Now, Viewport is a very limited renderer, but I forgot about Stingray. And Stingray is a built-in shader type in Maya, which is very much a game engine shader. And it does all sorts of cool stuff. So you can actually put a refraction shader in that. So I'm going to make a little video that I think is going to solve that. And if you put that in front of your camera, it really will bend and warp everything behind it, and it will look really underwater AF. I hope. So I like problem-solving things like that. That's that technical, creative problem-solving that I love. I couldn't let that one lie. I thought about it for days, going, how would I do that? And then clicked. So I'll send you a link. Well, I'll put it online for everyone to see. Because it's not just useful for underwater, it's useful for if you're doing like, if there's a scene with a sniper rifle or binoculars, any sort of warping. It's a really cheap, tasty effect. And it's so easy. So we'll put that online. And just to kind of cover what we've been through as we come towards the end of today's session. So in week 1, of course, we introduced ourselves, of course. Well, I introduced you to, of course, what the module is and what it's about. And we took a look at some of those kind of early blockouts and, of course, some of the early pre-visualizations of films like Lord of the Rings, still the greatest pre-vis trilogy ever made. I just wish they'd release the pre-vis as a DVD. I will watch it happily. I wish they'd do that for everything, to be honest. Now, of course, some extras these days do come with all this content. Very few do it right, though, which is providing the whole thing with director commentary about how that was pulled together. But again, I refer to Lord of the Rings often, as you know. One, because it's one of the standout productions of this industry, or at least the film industry, and because it has an extensive made-of DVD collection, and it's good to see that level of detail. Not every film does that. And the more we learn about the filmmaking process, the better. Now, of course, even that's 20 years ago. How we're making films and TV shows now has changed, but things like Lord of the Rings changed a lot of that. Things like Star Wars, things like Blade Runner, and even the Harry Potter films. All of those big blockbuster films are always solving problems and creating new technologies for us to do things with. So it's always important to go back to those big ones. You don't have to like them, by the way. If you hate Lord of the Rings, well, we're not friends. Secondly, that's okay. But other films and franchises are important as well. So anywhere you can get precious information like that is super valuable and important to what we do. It's also super nerdy and interesting. There's an engineering to what we do. I don't think that word gets used enough. And we used to use it, like Disney used to use the word Imagineer. So imagination mixed with engineer. Cheesy, I know. But that's really what it was all about. Somewhere between technical and creative ability is an engineer's mind-like thinking, solving problems, creating things that solve problems, and creating tools to help us solve our own problems is super valuable. Of course, next up we were talking sort of the basics of 3D in Maya, and we'd look at some of the basic concepts of how 3D software works and where it's applied and what it's used for. Very dry lecture, but ultimately important to get some of the fundamentals out of the way. And next up we move into, I think, probably one of the more passionate lectures in the series, which is talking about light and lighting, and the impact, the effect and impact that has on us as not just creatives and as, human beings, but ultimately how we use that and manipulate that in the things that we make to kind of create things like mood, atmosphere, light and shadow, to create areas of focus and attention, and of course, just to more than anything, use that all in that sort of goal that I keep saying, which is manipulating audiences, which is always a really interesting way of putting it, trying to morph how they think. For some reason, I just had a brain flash there. I hate that. I'm talking and then I get a news article in my head, and it was Martin Scorsese's new film is 4 hours long. What's that got to do with light? I don't know, but that's what the Galaxy told me. And anyway, thank you, Galaxy. So, lighting is actually one of my favourite topics. I could do a 7-part series on that if I really wanted. Bore you all to death, by the way, but lighting's super valuable, super important, of course. The colour, the temperature, and the effect that 3-point lighting setups and beyond has on the work that we do is super effective. Next up was storytelling. It's a particularly fun lecture to give, one, because there's voiceover sections, and that's always fun. And anywhere you just kind of get to indulge in the art and the craft of telling stories, which is what we do ultimately in everything that we do, is always good fun. But how you piece that together, how you pace that, and how you use plot devices to move your story forward are important considerations for us as not just artists and designers, but fundamentally as people that have stories to tell, that have meaning, that have impact, and have, more than anything, make sense. Too many stories in this world don't make sense. I watched Suicide Squad. There's a film that doesn't make sense and has no point. It was just a lot of cool parts stuck together, like a collage. Lots of collage films lately, where you can see they've filmed 5 hours of content and cut patches of it and stuck it together and hope that was contractually good enough to be released as a film. But it wasn't. Anyway, less of my ranting. Next up was 3D animation, of course. Animation is familiar territory to you anyway. I think in first semester you covered a lot of that content. But thinking about animation with a third dimension, of course, changes some things and adds further consideration about the sort of stuff that we do. Good news for us is, and I'll mention it later, is that we don't want high animation fidelity in this module. Same way I don't want high-end sculpted models either. Don't over-focus on things that aren't going to be reviewed well. Previs is really bad animation, but it's enough. It's enough animation to make the scene make sense. Basic movements, basic things being where they should be, and it's all just wired together, essentially quite roughly. So don't over-focus on things. If you're worried about things like hands and fingers and eyes and expressions, you're worried too much about the wrong things. Those should just be suggested or hinted at. Basic animation is all we need for this module. Of course, interface is real and imagined, I think, is my favourite lecture in the series, simply because it's something we don't get to think about a lot of the time, or its importance in things like entertainment, film, games, television. It's a side I don't think discussed enough anywhere, to be absolutely honest with you. You can try and find YouTube stuff on it. It's kind of like a boring area. So hopefully I may manage to convince some people that those are important considerations to make in the world building activity of what we do. And of course, world building is, again, essential, not just storytelling, but world building to what we do as well. Luckily, these days, there's lots of great examples of that. Sound and music is, of course, more important than we think too, simply because, well, see, it's a really daft statement to make. I think you all knew it was important. But I think, again, the considerations on an emotional level about how music, sound effects can reinforce what we're doing visually is super important. 2 + 2 = 5 in this case. And that's always important for us. We get more from by doing it than we just kind of would mathematically otherwise. And that combination of good music choices and good moving visuals tends to create something that is greater than the two parts combined, which is always nice. And again, another favourite of mine, which is Every Frame is a Painting, which is of course looking at the construction of the composition and framing of what we do on screen. Super valuable for all sorts of reasons, but more importantly, trying to give a little bit of passion there too, because ultimately your voice, what you find important, what you deem essential to what you film and what you make, has to go in there too. There may be rules in cinema, maybe rules in movie making, but ultimately you're still the auteur, the arbiter. Somebody's voice has to be there, and you do things your way. What I love about this module is how bloody insane some of the results are. And that's great. I don't get that from modern cinema. Modern cinema is formulaic. It's people with large amounts of money doing things very safely. And sure, they might tell interesting stories with interesting characters, but ultimately it tends to be relatively low-risk stuff. So when you look towards young filmmakers or entertainment makers, game makers from all sorts, young designers in general, you tend to have more to say and you tend to do it differently than anyone in Hollywood. And that's a good thing. We need that. And hopefully that's what rejuvenates the creative sector, and that's the place that we go. Today we'll do a camera boot camp. I'll be honest with you, it's not terribly exciting stuff, but it's important stuff and considerations to make when attaching cameras to curves to animate them and solve some of the problems that we have about moving cameras around. But we can automate some of that and do it in a nice, easy way. But also, basic camera movements are simple, but adding some flair to that can just kind of give us that little bit of kick-ass movement that makes things look and feel better. Obviously next week was video editing basics, and then after that was just the finishing touches, but I think I'll release those anyway as just general content and use those sessions for coursework support, as I'll use week 13 and 14, so that there's somewhere you can come and we can solve any of the problems that you're having with your coursework directly. So I think it makes a lot of sense, hopefully anyway. And of course, online technical drop-ins this week, so there's one tomorrow. There's not one next week because again I'm scheduled out with honours meetings. There's like 9 in a row or something. Trust me, it's insane. And then of course for the rest of the semester, weeks 12, 13 and 14 we'll have an online drop-in as well. Great place to come along, show some stuff, get some help. And of course, 5 common submission issues. I said I'd do this last year. Avoid these pitfalls. Number 1, pacing and timing is usually this is all based on feedback from last year, just kind of what are the 5 things students tended to get wrong. Pacing and timing tends to be one of the trickier areas, so I put that at number 1. There's no real solution to this one. It isn't easy, especially when you're learning to get to grips with it, but an awareness of it will solve some problems already. So again, think about the order of the events and how they happen, how long those events are supposed to take, and the rhythm of the plot beats you're trying to get across. So if anything takes too long or happens too quick, try to solve that early. Now obviously people that have done say early animatics or storyboards will have solved that actually quite well, or at least given themselves a better position to solve those problems. And of course how we flow from one shot into another is important as well. Again, considering that the editing process, you could probably just do screen wipes and screen blends, things that make all of that a little bit easier for you, so you don't have to do it necessarily inside of Maya. An exposition is it's a tricky one because you either do too much or you do too little. That's the 2 flavors usually. Now obviously, exposition is the important information audience needs to understand the plot. 8 times out of 10 or 4 times out of 5, if you want to put it that way, you don't really need it. The scene makes sense on its own, simply because I'll have read your book, I'll have read the synopsis, and it'll all make sense. But if it's a scene that happens in the middle of something important, so a lot of people last year had these big action set pieces, where I didn't know where that was coming from, and some people put a little phrase or 2 at the start or a narration at the start that really helped, and some people did nothing, so it was very confusing. So it's a very project dependent thing, so you just got to ask yourself, do I need any explanation here for this scene to make sense? If the answer is no, then brilliant, don't do it. If the answer is yes, then add something, but never overkill it. Don't need loads and loads of dialogue to kind of explain something. So again, if you do, keep things simple. Simple as that. And don't skip processes as well. It's usually very easy to tell in a project when somebody has skipped the creative processes of making something and they've just kind of hashed it together. That usually sticks out quite well. Not always. There's 1 or 2 people with that, that's somehow that natural ability to just pull the wool over my eyes and make it work. But don't rely on that. But 1 or 2 people have done it before. But in general, always follow the process. Make sure that you've worked things out meticulously well and then executed it. It will work out better for you. Don't over-focus on fidelity. So be careful where you spend your time. High-quality assets are not the goal. Rendering is less important than you think, and demonstrating a basic grasp of modeling, lighting, and materials, of course, and animation and cameras is really what I'm looking for. And don't over-focus on animation either. I think a lot of people, somebody got themselves into a right pickle last year trying to make a literal Pixar film. Doesn't work when you're one person and you've got 4 weeks left. So don't do that. So final say, of course, is that each of you will solve technical and creative issues that are very bespoke to your projects. That's the fun part from my perspective. Not everybody's doing the same thing. That's really cool. And the real test of this module is, of course, how you approach that problem solving. Bringing a story to life using new processes, software, tools, and all that, it is difficult, but that's the gauntlet. And of course, I think you're in a good place to take that on at this point. Not everyone feels like that, of course, but you will pull it off, trust me. So show me how well you handle this. That's what I'm looking for mostly. Overall, thank you very much I hope the lecture series was interesting to you in some regards. If not all of it, then at least some of it. I will see you in class. I've got to jump off to another lecture. As usual, lovely to hang out with you all. You got a question?
No, I
No?
was saying goodbye.
Oh, goodbye! I'll see you in class.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks everybody. See you later.